Okay, we decided we're going to go into our next presentation. So we have Larry here. And I should mention, MASB has a very active sponsorship accountability initiative. And as part of that initiative, we often look at cutting edge type of things. Like, for example, the industry basically brought forward to MASB to take the lead on the NIL, the name, image, and likeness movement for collegiate athletes. And so we're always looking for innovative techniques. And so Larry's going to be here to present some actual case studies with data that actually ties together the synergy between the brand and the actual sponsorship. So Larry, with that, welcome.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to make a business sponsorship. So, and things I'm going to talk about today are fan engagement. I think a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is how we can do better than we currently do in measuring sponsorship. That's still kind of a low bar, but so I think there's a lot of room for improvement. One is for fan engagement. I'm going to talk about media value and hope that we can take that off the table and move past sponsorship awareness. Yes, thank you. 40 years too late, but let's try and get it done. I'm going to talk about authenticity as a factor in making sponsorships effectiveness. But my main focus is going to be on activation and brands. There's a saying in the sponsorship business that it's all about the activation, and in my research, that's true. And I'll also say that there's a trend, I think, in sponsorship to chase sales, whether that's through on-site, what gets poured on site, what gets sold on site, but that sponsorship works best when it works through building brands. So this is the fundamental approach. Let's make it simple. We're going to measure three things: fan engagement, activation, and brand engagement. First, I want to talk about fans. But this is something I think is low-hanging fruit. A lot of times we talk about sports fans as a football fan, handball fan, baseball fan, hockey fan, ice hockey fan. And the reality is that fans' interests are multidimensional, but they're not random. So this is a segmentation I did for fans in Indianapolis. So if you're in Indianapolis and you're a sponsor and you want to reach all sports fans, I identified 5 different groups. One, I would say, is kind of mainstream college. IU Indiana football, IU Indiana University, Notre Dame. The next I'll say is minor league, and these are get quite a bit of attendance, and they're more popular among younger people because it's cheaper. There's the pro teams, Colts, Pacers, and Indiana Fever. Really happy to see the Fever load in that group. And then this was something that was interesting to me, that Purdue's on its own. So this is, and I think not something that a lot of sponsors, if you didn't run this analysis, you wouldn't think of. You need Purdue. If you want to cover all sports fans, you need Purdue. And then lastly, racing. So the way I would say is, this is kind of a Chinese menu. Pick one from column A, pick one from column B, but you need to understand when if your sponsorship portfolio, when are you reaching unique? So when are you expanding reach, and when are you reinforcing with the same people? The data exists for this. It's just the analyses aren't run. But there's plenty of data, and there's, I think, should be more of this. So fan engagement is also multidimensional. We tend to focus on behaviors. or sometimes I think one of the common measures is just interest, and you have a very loose definition of fan, but there are really some really important components. So behaviors are, of course, are really important because you need to see, you need to be exposed, you need to consume. But there are lots of ways that you can interact with a sponsorship. So, for example, I can like the Milwaukee Brewers. I like the Brewers. I can never watch a game. I can never go to a game. I can never read about them. I can never follow them on social media. But I can walk into a supermarket and go into the beer aisle and see the Brewers and react to that because I like it. So there are a lot of fan behaviors. That's the fan passion, right? There's a passion that's not necessarily related to behaviors, but not identical. In sports in particular, there's, I think, there's a fan identification. And this is a psychological identification where people will say, I am a fan. This is who I am. I'm a Brewers fan. Not I like the Brewers, not I go to the games. I am a Brewers fan. That's part of who I am. And lastly, this gets undermeasured, I think, but something we do a lot at Spiegel is social engagement, meaning how you interact with other people. And this is important because this is the strongest predictor of behaviors. So whether it's, we find this actually in news consumption too, how people read news. I'm going to subscribe to the New York Times. I'll read the New York Times, but I'm not going to keep my subscription unless I share what I read with other people. If you look at the New York Times, they have in the upper right corner what I call talkers. They'll have 3 stories. So, here's the news, and then here's the 3 stories that are you need to know, because this is what we're going to be talking about at the cocktail party on the Upper West Side. Engagement's important because it drives outcomes. On the left is some research I've done that sports fans like advertising more. I think this aligns well with Nielsen. That ad revenues punch 4 times above time spent in the U.S. So it's 8% of viewing and 31% of ad revenues. I like this because it matches up really well. It's pretty much exactly with what I found. So I would say that in advertising, that fan engagement is already priced into sports. But sponsorship is more than just an integrated media buy. So on the one, so if you say, and this is, so if I say, well, if I can reach sports fans, so sports fans like advertise more, I'll just advertise to sports fans. I don't need to pay you for a sponsorship. I'll just advertise. But sponsorship is more than that. It's also more than advertising. So this is an important point. So engagement will drive, fan engagement drives outcomes with advertising, but also with promotional activities. I heard some terms, cross-pollination. There's another one. We still say, I'm at Medill, we still say integration. So say IMC, integrated marketing communications. So this is one of the challenges with sponsorship, but also one of its strengths, that it involves multiple activation planks. I say sponsorship is a platform for IMC. One of the things we don't know, and I think I've actually pitched this I've mentioned it to the ANA as the next study that they should do in their sponsorship committee is on activations. We should learn more about how sponsors activate, which activations support which objectives, where does sponsorship work best, along which activations, how do you put this together, how much do you spend? These are all questions, of course, that when I work with sponsors, these are all questions that they want help with. How do I get my budget, and then how do I spend it? So how does this break down? There's actually, I always ask this question, what percentage, this is in general, the whole marketing industry, what percentage of marketing communications spending is on paid media? And then what percentage is below the line? I still say below the line. We could just say everything else. Well, if we go back to the 80s, this is 1984, that's PIMS data. I'm actually working on, I'm trying to, at Medill Spiegel, we're trying to relaunch PIMS. We'd love to get the band back together on that and get brands to share across different brands their marketing expenditures and then link that to outcomes. I think because we don't have guidelines. The IPA does a lot of work in advertising. They have Les Bennett and Peter Field do some great work in recommending budgets for paid media. And I've asked Les, what about below the line? He said, good question. So this is what we have. And then, so that's 84, 2003, this is from survey research out of the London Business School. And I find it interesting because it's the same, 60-40. There's some evidence that it might be that some spending has shifted below the line. I think maybe because of influencer marketing, if you want to consider that below the line, but away from paid media. But that's and so this is the how do you build the brands. I think the best case for below the line marketing comes from advertising, ironically. Les Bennett and Peter Field, from their work, this is from their first publication, they said below the line, their recommendation is the more the merrier, because what they found is that what they call multi-channel campaigns, but what I'd say integrated marketing, IMC campaigns, that they're more efficient. You get average share of market gain is 2.6% if you use advertising and other channels, and advertising alone, so you more than double. And then effectiveness rises with the number of below the line channels. So 4+. So that's why they say the more the merrier, and then the recommendation is if you can afford it. And I say, well, if you're more than doubling your share of market, if you're increasing your effectiveness chance of rate by 50% or more, how can you afford not to do this? Sponsorship is a part of this. So what's actually in the IPA? I'm looking forward to their new director. I've asked them to do another integration study. They have the data. They have some really great data on marketing communications. This is from about 10 years ago, where they look at the total effects of just advertising and one other below the line. And for sponsorship, advertising and sponsorship, and this I think intuitively makes sense, they saw a lift in what they call soft business, so brand effects, and for sales promotions, they saw the harder business effects. Okay, so there's a business case for integration. That integration works. That integration is going to be linked to business outcomes, not just brand, but financial efforts, so share of market. Most brands don't do it. So that cross-pollination, this is actually from a Nielsen study in India. And again, they have the data. I'd like to see the analysis done on this, but what they found was 5 to 8% growth in when BTL, and for BTL, so they have measured paid media, and BTL was just doing something in store, check the box. That's 0-1, not what they do, whether it's linked to a sponsorship. And I saw a 5 to 8% growth year one, year two. Then I actually contacted the authors on that because I said, how do you define integration? And they said, just doing it at the same time. Right? Like, does it have to be conceptually coordinated? No, just doing it at the same time. And I say, so here's what they found, that you get a 5 to 8% growth just doing it at the same time, and 80% of the time you don't do it. Why? Because your media people and your shopper marketing team don't talk to each other. That's what I would guess. So more recently, this is System 1. System 1 does thousands of copy testing, ad testing, and they found 5% of ads integrated sponsorship IP, despite this a massive increase in effectiveness for sponsorship-linked advertising. Um,
In the work that we did with the ANA, we did a very broad-based survey, quantitative, and then did qualitative format or follow-ups with a good portion of those who participated. And there were two cases in that which really, I think, strike home on this. And Karen can also comment if she likes. But two of the cases, one of the cases was an entity that actually got the legal rights, the IP rights for it, but put forward no budget to actually activate against the campaign because the legal aspect and the marketing aspect were not talking to each other. So they bought the rights, but they not integrated in the campaign because there was no coordination. The most hurtful one, I think, was a person that when we were on the phone with them, they were doing an integration with a professional sports team, and they had the rights for packaging. And there was a miscommunication on the upfront timetable for the production of the packaging and the major event that they were doing, so that it got out of whack, so that the packaging wasn't in time for the event. And so there again is an activation issue. So I think this this idea of simultaneity, it seems like it should just be basic blocking and tackling. But the truth of the matter is there are many millions of dollars currently going on where the activation where this isn't taking place, where the integration not only with the campaigns but with packaging, in-store promotion as you're mentioning, is just not taking place, even if the rights are purchased, even if they made the investments in the rights.
But and this is true not only for sponsorship but marketing more broadly. So for example, there's a lot of press about advertising briefs, creative briefs. How do you write a brief? And the agencies complain, we get crappy briefs. And so here's how you write an advertising brief. And one thing I say, well, in your advertising brief, you should include what else you're doing. That's it. Just include it. So when you're putting together the advertising, just say, oh, by the way, here's what we're doing in store. Here's this consumer promotion that we're launching. Here's what we do with CRM. Here's what our emails look like. Here's what our content. Here's our app. Here are the different things that we're doing. And they don't. And not only do they not do it, it wouldn't even think of it. And even if they did, so this is one of the things with ad agencies, they don't even know what sponsorship is. They still call it endorsement. But I know I have a colleague who does sponsorship 101s for ad agencies. It's also been my experience. I worked in the big holding companies, WPP, Interpublic Group, and it'd be amazing. Like I'd have to explain, I would do sponsorship 101 constantly, and even working. And if I do research with brands, with sponsors, a lot of what I do is internal sales. I'm building a business case so you can take it to the media department so you can get some budget to spend so they can, or that even better. And this is real tough, like creating an ad that's linked to the sponsorship that you're going to air to the audience. And there's big money, like you're already spending $60 million on the media campaign. So this is a back of the cocktail napkin type calculation, which I've said, right? Like I said, well, okay, you're spending $60 million on your media campaign. That's a $60 million media buy. What's it worth to increase the effectiveness by 30%? Say, yes. So then that's now the question. So I'll talk about the media value. Boy, this is, I kind of feel like Groundhog Day and sponsorship measurement, that this is still around and it keeps on coming back. It's just a zombie. It just will not die, Karen. It just will not be put away.
There's a lot of that in this whole marketing.
Relative price. You got a hell of a deal on this pair of new shoes. I didn't need a new pair of shoes, but I got a hell of a deal.
Well, and there's not a lot of, and I'll say among sponsorship executives, Actually, I talked to one, there's a VP of sponsorship at the Indiana Pacers. He said, I would not sell a sponsor a logo only deal. And I said, yeah, well, you shouldn't. I mean, it's kind of professional malpractice. But this is a question on the media value. I mean, if you were licensed, you would have it revoked by the board, right? But we're not, and so it still happens. And and unfortunately, there's not a lot of research on the value of media. So when I say media, I mean logo exposure. You have a sign at the stadium. This is the old saying: what's the difference between a sign in a bus station and a sign in a baseball stadium? About $1 million a year, right? So this is one of the questions. One study says, and I think they did it with college basketball in about 2010. They had an arena with no signage, an arena with signage, and they compared sponsorship awareness rates for the two and found basically no difference. So Chick-fil-A, you'll notice, came to the top. And one of the things that they did was they had kind of the balloons or the parachutes, and they did a lot of stuff in arena. They activated. So why do I need signage? This is a good question. And I'm torn about this. I'm torn about this because I think there is a value to in-arena signage. Right? It's just not what they say it is. The current numbers are simply made up. Right? You'll have companies like Nielsen will determine your amount of time and audience in excruciating detail. And then they'll do an advertising equivalency. And then they'll say, here's the advertising equivalency, but of course it's not equivalent 100% advertising, so we discount it. And then I say, well, how do you come up with the discount rate? And they say, some people will say we have a proprietary algorithm, which when I hear that, I'm almost certain that they don't have one. That's like a pretty good indication that they don't. But typically, it's just it's made up. So I want to also talk about a sponsorship awareness, because this is also linked to. So these are the two, I think, areas. Exposure and then awareness are still the most common units of analysis. Like we'll compare exposed fans to non-exposed fans. Like, did you see a game? Watch the game, or aware fans to not aware fans. It's been really common in academia as a dependent variable. Like so many, and I still see them. Sponsorship awareness studies. What predicts awareness? And you say, okay, it predicts awareness, but who cares? Right? And even people within the industry will say, yeah, awareness, who cares? And there's a reason for that. I mean, it's because there's really weak support. Exposure and awareness are weak predictors of brand outcomes. Sometimes it shows up, sometimes it doesn't. Exposure is linked to awareness, and awareness can be a catalyst for activation. So this is where I say, probably don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater, right? That there are effects, but they're indirect. And what we're going to focus on then is the activation. So here's a question. There's actually quite a few studies. This is becoming more popular. What's the multiplier effect for sponsorship? Sponsorship is in a difficult position because it's, there's a multiplier effect for marketing, right? So marketing has a multiplier effect on sales, for example, and then with sponsorship, you're another step removed. Right now, you have a multiplier effect for marketing, which has a multiplier effect on your other outcomes. So one of the common ways of measuring this, I see a lot of sponsors looking at is our amplification studies, and they're basically copy tests. And the idea is, what's the lift from the IP, from the intellectual property? So what happens? So Frank, to your point, we bought the IP, right? And you say, okay, we bought the IP. What's the IP worth? And this is like that line item thinking of what's the value. But this is another question. You say, what's the value of a brand? But then also, what's the value of a brand to other brands? So what's the...
It's a really good question I have on what you just said there. And because when you're buying IP rights, you're buying the rights to use and do, right? So when you're going and talking about like the sponsorship association that's there, are we talking about like including the cost of actually associating them in the value calculation of sponsorship?
Absolutely. And the bigger, and it's, before we even get there, right? This is another question is, what's that ratio? So what do I need to spend? So what do I need to spend to make this work? And then what's it worth to me? Well, so again, this is what's the value of the IP?
Are you going to discuss any hierarchy of effects here?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
All right, waiting for that.
Yeah,
Are you gonna talk about B2B?
absolutely. Thank you. You were a little early.
Oh, that's cool.
We'll come back in like 5 slides, something like that. So here's a test. One of the problems with a lot of the amplification studies is that they're done on crap ads, right? Like they compare, like here's an ad with IP, and then we're just going to take the IP out. And I'm like, well, it's a crap ad. Nobody would do that. So I did this a copy test on soccer fans with Heineken, and used 2 ads. I just took 2 ads that they use. This is not sponsored by Heineken. So this is what I get overall. The sponsorship, the IP rights, the lift to advertising is kind of modest, right? Like if you just say, hey, it's the IP, right? Like I'm just looking at the IP. I said, this is kind of modest. It's really not worth a whole lot. Say, yeah, because you're commoditizing the IP. If we take a look now closer, so this is how I start. This is, I'm predicting the sponsorship ad. I start out age and gender, drink beer. So I want to know, I want to control for that and say, yeah, younger people, beer drinkers like the ad. And so, okay, how about fans? If I add fans, so this is fairly typical. I did fan identification, fan community, fan behaviors, all significant predictors, right? And that takes away gender. Right, so it's really not gender. I mean, it takes away age. So it's really not younger people. It's that they're bigger fans. They're bigger soccer fans. And this is a lot of times. This is where a lot of sponsorship research ends. And it's saying, see, we see a relationship. Fans like the IP more. So here's the relationship. So okay, well, let's put in awareness. I divided this. 2 aspects, because I say awareness on its own doesn't show up. Authenticity. Actually, and this is something that I've come around on authenticity. I was a skeptic. And then I took on authenticity and I thought, hey, being promoted is kind of this an academic thing, but then I took a closer look and it's kind of consistent across research I've done. Authenticity and awareness. Right, so this is where you say, hey, awareness, right? Now here's my proof. I could do my aware, unaware, and it'll show up. People aware, fans aware of sponsorship are going to like the ad more. And then I put in the other stuff that Heineken does. So they do soccer-related social media. They're very active, and they do promotions. So when I put those in, then the awareness disappears. So this is what's that path to the sponsorship effectiveness? What about for the brand ad? Well, for the brand ad, and this is what was a problem. I say, if I just look at the IP, I don't get a huge difference. I don't get a contribution like I would say this. But what we see, Heineken does a lot of sponsorships in soccer. They have a lot of equity in the brand and the associations. So there's a similar pattern to sponsor. And basically, what my conclusion here is, and again, so sponsorship, I'll say sponsorship makes everything you do more effective. So this is the fan behavior. When I'm a fan of the Champions League, I'm a soccer fan, but I'm also a fan of other sports. I follow other things. I like the ad, but I also like what other things that sponsorship does. So I see, and this is for me. This is one of the areas I did this on my own because I'm getting high on my own supply. I'm a Champions League fan. I see this ad and I think Champions League. I can actually hear the theme. So I think for a lot of soccer fans, just the Heineken, right, this evokes because they built up such equity. And this is a point about why awareness, IP, it's the broader brand association with the brand, property in the brand, leveraging, activating my fan passion, my fan engagement. So my takeaways here are, number one, sponsorship makes everything you do more effective. So it's a multiplier effect, not only with what you're doing in sponsorship, but everything else. If you're buying IP rights, you don't commoditize them. You can think of the broader relationship, and this also speaks to authenticity. That with one of the best ways, so authenticity, when I say authenticity, people will think like, it's got to be charitable. It's not that it needs to be charitable or a community cause or anything. Authenticity means the best way to build it is with long-term deals. And actually, this is one of the things that we always see with sponsorships is that the length of deal is a predictor of effectiveness. You build equity in a sponsorship. And so this support, and I say this because there's a move in sponsorship away from this. There's a move towards line item veto. We just want the IP rights because I just want the package. And I say the package alone is not going to, all this other stuff makes that package work. The long-term relationship is making that package work. All these factors going together, and they're important.
That's interesting because I've heard recently a comparison, which I think gels with what you're just saying, that compares short-term versus long-term sponsorship with term life insurance versus whole, right? So you build equity in whole life, and you're just renting it for whatever length of time in term.
And when you stop payments, it goes away, and that's it.
Okay.
So this is again because you have sponsors, and I say marketers, right? There's marketing in general. Your CFO is going to look at your marketing budget and say 10% is going to shopper marketing. What is that? Because I want to know, can I cut it? Like, do we need this? Right? And actually, it could be the CMO looking at it because
what's the lag on a lot of these sponsorships? Like, so you ink the contract, you start paying. How long do you have to wait before an analytical system is going to compute the value being received?
I'm going to say, number one, depends on what you're using it for,
That's fair.
right? So,
Doesn't it depend on how long?
and
Absolutely, there's lots of variables. I'm just saying as a category, what you see.
yeah. Well, if it's brand, that's going to be a longer window. If it's sales activation, it's shorter. Or I'm going to say sales activation or behaviors, right? Because it could be, and this is, again, how it's linked. A lot of sponsors want to, everybody's got a first party data strategy, right? Okay, so how do I get people to sign up? In particular, so, life insurance. I want I want people with investable assets. I did this work with Bank of America. And you want people with investable assets. They don't enter promotions.
Yeah, so that would be, I guess, my follow-up question is about cost and risk profiles for the customer, right? If you're asking them to, if you're trying to activate them against buying a beer, that's one thing. You're trying to get them to take a much bigger purchase, a much bigger risk. That's something altogether.
I know we can break that down into components, just a few slides early.
All right, cool.
First, I want to talk about brand. And I'll say this for B2B because there's parallels, right? In B2B, we're going to talk about client hospitality, corporate hospitality, client entertainment. So what's my suite worth? Right? And
Sales enabled.
I mean, it's about, here's an estimate. I saw 20 billion a year. Companies spend 20 billion a year on sports tickets. That's, I don't know how it's calculated. It sounds about right to me. I don't know what the exact number is, but it's a lot, right? Like we'll just say it's a lot, probably about what they spend on trade shows. Kind of give or take, right? So fair question. If I'm a CFO, like I'm going to want to know, what do we get for that? This is 20% of my marketing budget is on this, right? I mean, Deloitte's an Olympic sponsor, women's soccer, they're all over the place. I want to know, what are we getting for this? It's a fair question. So and I'll say though, that the goal there is a little bit different. So this is again, long-term. And there's the research on this, I'll ask people, luxury suite buyers, why do you buy a luxury suite? The number one answer is client relationships. I'm going to build and maintain client relationships, right? So likewise, I'd say that's kind of the B2B equivalent of brand, where we would say the activation builds brand. So your corporate hospitality builds a relationship. And the relationship is going to lead to, likewise with the brand. If I have a strong brand, then if I have that strong brand, then I'm going to increase my engagement with my other marketing activities.
A lot of B2B have a very narrow understanding of that, right? They tend to see it as, like their logo on a Formula One car. That's awareness, right? Just pure raw awareness. And then there's the whole client or entertainment,
Well,
which is really more sales enablement.
I don't blame them. That's our fault.
Yeah.
We've had 30 years to do something and done jack shit. Okay. And we got a lot to learn from advertising. Advertising, hey, if you want to find, and I'll say this, below the line marketing in general, right? If I have a question, hey, how do I spend my ad budget? How much should I spend and where should I spend it? Will you get an answer? You can Google that. How many companies have answers to that question? If I say same question below the line, all you're going to get is shrugs.
Down, enough things should shuffle at the top. They came back and said, look, we're debating whether we really need this. We're spending a lot of money on this thing every year. But I'm like, okay, well, I don't like metrics to talk about. We've been having these for a long time. Let's get on metrics. So when we went to take a look at it, they would be more impaired by cutting the sponsorship than by keeping it. Because it becomes so associated with the financial services brand that what does it mean to cut the sponsorship? And I don't know when that inflection point is, but at a certain point, it kind of happens where the general public just co-associates and it becomes a disruption to the thinking.
Well, kind of the magic of sponsorship is that it can last beyond the relationship. I worked with a really big sponsor and I did research and I said, boy, you're getting a really huge, you're getting a good lift on your promotions. And she said, you mean the ones we're not doing? And I said, exactly. Those are exactly the ones you're getting a lift on because, you have such equity in the sport that this is the perception, right? Like, yeah, I love the stuff that you do, even though you don't do it. So I love that you're a sponsor, even though you're not a sponsor, but you're still going to get credit for it.
That's really interesting.
Is that right?
But
It's not bad.
I mean, I can say this, NASCAR is easy because the awareness numbers are great and there's very little inaccurate. But yeah, you could still do, I mean, I could do a survey if you have fans who've been fans for a while, but even if they've not, you could do sponsors from 30 years ago and you'll get good numbers.
one of the other things that we see a lot in B2B is that you'll get, particularly in tech, where you see a lot of meteoric rises. You'll get a marketing team that says, we're a big boy company now, right? And we're going to do a big boy sponsorship. Olympics being a great example of that, right? Almost without reference to how it will actually move the needle for the business.
Or what they're going to do with it. I mean,
We've actually deconstructed several situations like that, some of which were just absolute caps.
say this is don't commoditize the IP, right? Because now there's a big thing on like sleeve sponsorships. And I'm like, yeah, because what I really love about my team is the sleeve. I mean, I have this massive emotional attachment. I'm joking, of course, because who cares about the sleeve, right? And you say, well, the sleeve is going to get you exposure. And I say, yeah, well, who cares about exposure? What are you going to do? But there's no thought beyond that to the exposure is an asset that I can leverage. So here's the B2B slide. So this is, I said that for my theory on people in sales is that they're marketing majors. So marketing majors are business majors who aren't as good at math as finance majors. So the people who good at math go to finance, and then the marketer, and then you're not good at math, you go to marketer. And then salespeople are the marketing majors who can't do math at all, except when it comes time to calculate their commissions, and all of a sudden they're numerically literate. But so here's one that I worked with. But so here's something that I did. I said, you could do, this is for salespeople who are selling premium seating. So it's for an NFL suite. I talked to the team. I said, okay, so how do I measure this? Right? So and the way it is now that this is what they're doing. And, very proud that they have this technique. They would do, here's basically the book of business represented by people that I invite. 30 minutes, so and then you get these, it would be like, it reminded me of Joyce Julius days, because you get like a 500 to 1 ROI, and people are like, this is stupid. And I say, well, let's break this down, right, for relation. So what does your sales pipeline look like? I know you have one, because that's how you're going to calculate, what you're going to make next month, right? So here's your pipeline. So meetings, how do you doing with meetings? If I invite somebody to our suite at the Packers game, you attend, prospect. Then I say, hey, hope you can follow up. Hey, you had a great time at the game. Wondering, can I get 30 minutes, talk about whatever? You can take the meeting? Be more likely to take the meeting, right? So so here's a multiplier. So this is all I did here. I put that in. I said, this is from a published study. So there's actual kind of pipeline data. So I just put in, you got a 15% conversion rate for meetings. Let's just double. I'm going to be conservative, right? And say 30. I think that's low, because if I say for 200, I invite 200 people to a luxury suite at a Green Bay Packers game, what percentage are taking a meeting after? like I had no idea. A lot, right? So I said, let's be conservative, 30. Everything else is the same. Here's your conversion pipeline. Your proposal submitted, your close rate, everything else is the same. You get 600,000 incremental revenue, and ROI of 4.1 on the suite. Just forgetting those more meetings. Does that make sense? Okay, so now that's,
Do you have any data on deal velocity impact?
no. Dan Kaufman did a survey on that. But that's, and again, this is the, what do we do now? And this is to your point, that one of the things that we need to do is more randomized controlled trials. I actually talked to a big sponsor. I said, look, just set up an RCT. You probably don't want to take tickets away from your salespeople because they'll get pissed. Like, they know, or if they're using them, they think it works. And if you're pretty confident, so here's one way to do this. Let's get a prospect list of 400. You randomize 200, 200, invitation, no invitation, and then all the other stuff that you track on your sales metrics, track them on your sales metrics. Let's see how you do. Let's see how many more meetings. And this is now on the time, right? I might have a 12 to 18 month sales cycle, but I have a 1 month cycle on meetings. So that's something I would know pretty quickly, right? Like if you're going to take a meeting or not, that's probably going to, if you're going to take a meeting or not.
Responsiveness, yeah.
Now, hypothesis, I would think that the invitation would count for something. So if you were invited, hey, sorry, I can't make it, right? But I appreciate the invitation. That might not be the full lift, but this is why I'll say I'll include that as an amplification study across an activation plank. And in this case, your corporate hospitality would be an activation plank. If you think you could do it really easily, so many sponsors do social media contests. That's kind of easy, lends itself easy to field experiments. I think we should, this is even more broadly, there are a lot of marketing mix models that aren't. They're media mix models, drives me nuts.
Yep.
And I ask people about it and they say, in our world, marketing and advertising are the same thing. And I say, well, that'd get you an F at Medill in the intro class, but okay. You can do it, but if you already have it, then you should have sponsorship, and sponsorship linked marketing should be in the marketing mix model. So if you have the spending, it should be easy to include.
So, my information is 5 to 10 years old when I was still at Molson Coors. And when we did proposals with probably 5 of the top marketing mix modelers at that time, they refused to put sponsorships in the fund and contended they could not do it. How does that, is that still the case today?
But you need to understand why that is. So part of the reason why it's never there is you can't get an accurate assessment of competitive spend. And you have absolutely.
Yeah, the reasons they gave actually made sense.
But you absolutely have no idea what's spent on activation, if at all. So the factors of variability are so great, it's
Yeah, my question is, are any of the marketing mix modelers dipping their toe in this yet?
Yeah, there's a published study by Peter Kane a couple of years ago.
Okay.
And it's in the appendix, so I can send it to you. I do this because I want to, I'm like, that's, to me, that's the most interesting data. But this is to Karen's point. So I'm looking at, in the appendix, they had the spending listed by percentages, because that's to me, I'm like, that should be the lead. But okay, this is an academic journal, and that's what you're not interested in this. That's what I'm interested in. And it was like 40 to 45% sponsorship, which was, by the way, listed under PR. And the way it read, I was pretty sure that it was just rights fees, but actually I owe Peter a message, just ask him. Yeah. I'm pretty sure it was just rights fees because it's 40% and then there's the everything else. And then I'm pretty sure that it was rights fees, and then a lot of the other stuff was linked to the sponsorship. But I don't know what, and I don't think everything. right? So, I mean, certainly, I don't think search advertising, I don't think with sponsorship linked, I don't know. Sorry again?
SEM.
SEM, yeah, yeah, I have.
That is not this question.
Yeah, and it's pretty, I mean, the paths are pretty consistent. I mean, there's, kind of, variations, but the paths are pretty consistent. And consistent across that, it's the activation mediates everything. Brand, and then brand. And then there's a handful of published studies. So like I've done some, survey. That's why I feel like, we really need to take the next step. So, but in the meantime, so when I say amplification studies across activation planks, how many ads get copy tested? Like all of them. I mean, you could get a data bank of tens of thousands of ads. ARF does a copy test validation, right? I mean, huge, massive studies. What do we have for sponsorship? Like literally a couple of amplification studies, if you can find them. And most of the amplification studies, all you get from that is a slide on somebody's sales deck. Says we got a 50% lift and whatever. And you're like, I don't even know what this is. And then you're like, oh, we got a 50% lift on this ad, but oh, by the way, non-fans liked it better too. Better than nothing. Better than media equivalencies,
Oh, yeah.
but still, I think a lot of opportunity.
I think with that, I think that's our time. So thank you very much.